Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the George Meyers Show, where our purpose here is to investigate, evaluate, and inform, bringing you the truth, putting you back in charge. Tonight we have a very interesting topic. It's away from our normal political regime. We have a couple of members here of the Racine Preservation Racine, and first one is Robin Coventry to my right, and then we have Pippin Michelli over at the other end of the table here. They are both board members of Preservation Racine, and Robin is also a membership chairman and the vice president of the organization. So welcome, and I'm glad you came to the show.
Good
glad
morning,
you
George.
came.
Thank you.
The first thing I'd like to get into is a little bit about Preservation Racine. You know, what is it? I understand it's from looking at the Journal Times. This is your 37th year. Is that correct? So it's about 37 years ago, or you mentioned it might be 39 years old?
37 years for the annual tour.
Oh, for the annual tour, okay.
Historic places. 39 years.
Okay, so
President
it was originated by my calculation. That makes it about 1973
That's
that it
correct.
started.
Yeah.
And how did you come interested in old buildings? I mean, why are we so worried about them?
Well, first of all, I want to say to you that we are not talking about derelict warehouses. We are talking about well-loved homes and neighborhoods, and those are worth preserving. I think also it's very important to preserve the urban fabric, to preserve its continuity. You keep it beautiful, you keep it loved, and you produce that way a stable society, so that's important. And studies have shown that if you keep the urban fabric in good condition, you reduce petty crime and vandalism by 30%. So maintaining your historic houses gives you continuity and social stability and reduces crime. So I think these are all very good reasons
Wow, that's
for
very
preserving the
impressive. Yeah,
historic
I didn't realize
environment.
it had such an effect on the society itself. That he's just keeping these. You're saying now is that for the general condition of buildings, or is that specifically if we keep the older buildings around, the more beautiful ones around it? Does it bring up? You're saying it brings up the tone of the society.
Keeping the built environment in good condition is good against vandalism and petty crime.
Okay.
Keeping the older buildings seems to be also very good in its own right because people like those buildings,
Yeah,
and
they're very
the
impressive.
newer designs seem to have a bad effect on people. So they like those buildings, and they're the reasons we go to places. They're the reasons we go to places like Cedarburg, to Galena, to Boston, is for their old buildings. So that's another good reason to preserve them.
Brings back
Wonderful,
the-
wonderful architectural.
Yes, some are very. Now, one of the things I noticed particularly as I look at some of these buildings here, I'm not sure we could afford to put a building like that anymore because it requires so much detail. You have to put hours and hours of workmanship into it, as opposed to the new system. You just slap up some siding and put up some boards, and you're done. You know, I mean, a house like this would be very, very expensive. I think prohibitively to put up these days. Am I correct in that evaluation? Do you see that?
I don't know about the materials, the cost of materials these days.
I'm talking about more the labor.
Labor intensive, of course. I live in a historic home myself.
Yeah,
I
that's-
live in the Giddings home, Leroy and Caroline Giddings, the Gold Medal Company, and it was built in 1927. And I can attest that I have a very solid home.
Well, being in the housing myself, I look at some of the detail of even the balusters on the railings and some of the woodwork and stuff, and I thought, man, that takes some time to put in. And you look at some of the brick buildings, compare for instance, this building here, which one was it? It was the I guess if you looked at the firehouse there, and you look at the intricacies of the brickwork, and compare it to, for instance, the prison that was put up on Memorial Drive, which is just poured concrete, very plain, you can see which one took the most work. I mean, just the handiwork, just the time for these people to get out there on scaffolding and set this one out, set this one back, so you have a design in the brick. That takes time and attention, and it costs money.
Do you think it actually takes as much time as it looks? I'm thinking about factory-produced, which way back in the later 19th and earlier 20th century, we were already talking about mass-produced trims and things for houses. You're thinking of things like Queen Anne houses with all their woodwork. and their spindle work and stuff, which would have been factory produced after all.
Okay, so it was mass produced
So
already.
I think there was mass produced
Not individually
trims
produced
for
on a
those.
individual on a
Right,
lathe.
and an awful lot of those Queen Anne houses were catalogue houses by Sears and Aladdin and places. So I think they look more intricate and time-consuming to have built than they perhaps were. When I look at something like the fire station, and a lot of the frontages on Main Street, for instance, in the commercial area of Main Street, most of those brickwork fronts strike me as being like knitting. You know, you've got two stitches, and you put the brick in, you put it out, and it's actually not going to be much slower to produce those trims than to produce a straight brick wall. So,
Well, that's very interesting.
so I think you get the character, but you didn't actually sacrifice a lot of time and cost.
That's very interesting.
And they're still standing to this day.
Now, when you are looking at a building, which buildings get chosen to go on your registry? You have a registry of buildings, first of all, right? That you consider architecturally significant? It's not just every building in the city.
Are you thinking of the landmarks?
That
The list
type
of
of thing, yeah.
landmarks. It's got about 80 buildings on it, I think.
Right, yeah.
All right.
That's
Now,
what
in
I
other words, every building isn't eligible to be a Preservation Racine type of building, right?
We don't partake in registry. We do have an archive
Uh-huh.
at our office at the Blake House, which is at 936 South Main Street, but we do not get into the registry of homes. That would be the landmarks.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that, which has
Historic
nothing to do with you. What is your attention on as Preservation Racine? What type of buildings?
Our sole purpose, Pippin, would be to
To
identify
and
and-
help to protect buildings and sites with historical, cultural, and architectural significance.
That's what I thought.
and
Okay.
districts as well.
So-
And not necessarily on that landmarks register.
Right.
Okay. Okay. But that is
So I
that
wanted
is
to clarify that for you.
right. So in other words, you as a group,
Organization.
yeah, as an organization, look at all buildings, and if you see something significant, then you say, hey, this is a building that's worthwhile preserving.
Buildings, artifacts, districts, sites, anything with architectural, historical, or cultural value is of interest.
And the way I
And
understand-
not just the individual buildings, actually the environment around them
Exactly.
is important. If
Yes.
You don't want
For
to
instance?
save one historic building and leave it sticking out like a sore thumb in a modern oasis.
I was wondering about that too. Yes.
So
What
it's
happens if we're
important.
in the year 2300? I mean, is it we got this one firehouse sitting there, and then around it is all these modernistic floating cars
key,
and
key
totally
critical point, because what you want to do is keep the integrity of the environment
Well,
around.
you want to keep
Okay.
the sympathy of the environment. If you
Yeah.
actually look at old European cities, that is exactly what you see. The mere fact that the buildings are 500, 600, 700 years old doesn't actually change the fact that they jar with each other. If you were living at the time, you'd have thought, what's this monstrosity that's come in next to this beautiful old building? So actually
Yeah,
that
that's-
is historically what has happened, but we do want to keep the environment at least sympathetic and relevant around the
Okay.
buildings we're seeking to preserve.
And hence that's the sense of community.
Mm-hmm.
Brings
Yeah.
it right back to what we started this conversation about, was keeping the community alive and happy.
All right. Well, that's
And
cool.
safe.
Because and you mentioned 500 years in Europe. We're only in our 200th year here, so we've got a ways to go. What are some of the older buildings? How old are the buildings that they're on this tour? In the buildings that you've kind of pinpointed as being significant.
For the tour?
Well, for the tour, or just
In
any
general?
building that, yeah. What would you say?
We have numerous. We are very, very fortunate here in Racine to have wonderful examples of architecture that is so diversified.
And what would you say the oldest building is?
The oldest
in
roughly.
building in Racine?
Yeah, in
I
Racine.
think the oldest house in Racine is that one on Main Street with the red boarding.
Is that
And
around
the
what?
organised house, the organised garden goes back to 1851, I believe.
1851? That's about the time
It's about the
Wisconsin
time Racine
became
was
a state.
founded.
Yeah, yeah.